Hello, my name is Jesse McMahon. I will be presenting about the First Crusade. Before we begin talking about the First Crusade, we need to discuss what a crusade actually is. A crusade is a series of European military expeditions set out by Christian churches in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. They were located in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. During this period, there were 8 different crusades. These wars all started just so Christians could secure sacred land from Islamic rule. Crusades ended up being complete and utter bloodbaths, with many lives lost. According to John Hittell, there were an estimated amount of 1 million lives lost between all the crusades. From a very early time in the Middle Ages, Christians traveled and visited many holy places, such as Nazareth, where Jesus had lived, or where he was born in Bethlehem. This became very popular for Christians. The problem was that some of these holy places were now controlled by Muslims. The Muslim Turks were the ones that controlled the territory of Jerusalem. The Turks did not stop these Christian travelers, but they did put some taxes on them when they went there. Christians did not like the fact that Muslims had control of these holy places. So the Emperor Alexius asked Pope Urban II to help gain troops. The Pope was very eager to help the Emperor out. This is where the First Crusade began. Pope Urban II called for the Council of Clermont between the period of November 18th to the 28th of 1095. This meeting was held in his homeland of Clermont-Ferrand, France. The reason for this council was to recruit soldiers for the First Crusade. On November 27th, Pope Urban used a specific speech to help incentivize the people to go to fight for the Holy Land, or Palestine. This speech included many things. In the speech, Pope Urban explained that Western Europe was becoming too confining, or as we say nowadays, overpopulated. Urban also stated that because of the overpopulation, there isn't enough farmland to cultivate enough crops for everybody that lived there. He talked about how there was too much violence in European life, and this expedition would help maintain peace with God. Furthermore, Urban urged people to go because the crusade would forgive all sins. Pope Urban's speech at the Council of Clermont was so compelling to the people at the council that France decided to try and get all the bishops to talk about Urban's words to everybody. The message from Urban was spread all across Europe. France did not expect the huge turnout of people that actually decided to call to arms. Most of the people that decided to go along with Pope Urban's ideas were not knights, but they were peasants. The peasants usually had close to no fighting skills whatsoever. There were even women and monks that joined the crusade as well. Once someone joined the crusade, they were given a cross to sew across their chest, or on their clothes across their chest. This cross symbolized that you were in the army of the Crusaders. The Crusaders usually had to do vows when you agreed to join up. The earliest Crusaders were also known as the People's Crusade. The first people to respond to the call for arms from Pope Urban II was a large number of peasants. The self-appointed leaders of this huge group were Peter the Hermit and Walter the Penniless. Peter the Hermit was probably the most known leader of the People's Crusade, while Walter, a knight underneath Peter, working as his lieutenant, wasn't really as known. Peter's army did not have very much discipline. Before they even reached the Holy Land, Peter's army started with violence in Western Europe. They acted like complete barbarians. The peasants looted houses for food and supplies anywhere they went. They also terrorized the locals on their way to the city of Constantinople. Once they arrived to the city, the emperor hastily sent them to the Asia Minor. This is where the journey of the People's Crusade would come to an end. The Turks completely massacred Peter's army. The Prince's Crusade, which is also known as the official crusade compared to the People's Crusade, consisted of 4 different armies. These armies were led by Hugh of Vermandois, Godfrey, Raymond, and Bohemond. Hugh was a French nobleman that was the brother of King Philip I. Godfrey of Bouillon was a nobleman from the House of Flanders. Raymond was a powerful nobleman in southern France. The last noble was Bohemond, and he was the Prince of Antioch. Their armies combined were a massive force. According to the writer Thomas Asbridge, the armies were estimated to be around 60 to 100,000 strong. This included an estimated number of knights around 7,000 to 10,000 and a foot soldier amount of 35,000 to 50,000. The siege of Nicaea began May 14th of 1097. The city is located in what is now the city of Iznik, and is also near the eastern part of Lake Ascanius. This city was the first step for the Crusaders. The city was captured by the Turks years before the First Crusade. The Emperor Alexios wanted to take back control of Nicaea. During the People's Crusade, the peasants rampaged the outskirt lands outside the city walls before they were defeated. So, the leader of Nicaea, Kilij Arslan, did not expect much of the second wave of Crusaders since the first wave was so weak. He left the city to fight another battle because of this reason. Arslan was sorely mistaken to leave. When the Crusaders laid siege onto the city, Arslan had to rush back quickly to fight against the Crusaders. Both sides had many casualties, but at the end of the day, the Crusaders had won the battle. The strategy for the Nicaea siege was actually very simple. The Crusaders first decided to surround the city. Since the Nicaea city was near a lake, the Crusaders used naval troops, so the city could not escape on the water. These boats were very large, and it was said that it took 3 or 4 carts to get the boats across land and into the lake. The Crusaders used many manpower to overwhelm the Turks guarding the city. According to the writer Bernard, there were 40,000 Crusaders, while the Turks only had a force of 3,500 crossbowmen. The Turks tried to use the crossbowmen as a deterrent for any siege to happen. To get over the walls of the city, the Crusaders used large ladders to climb over. To cover the men going over the ladders, or going for the ladders, the Crusaders used a ballista to aim at the tower on the walls. A ballista is just a catapult for large rocks, and it also could be a large crossbow firing a spear. This is what the Crusaders did to defeat the city of Nicaea. The Battle of Dorylaeum happened not much after the siege of Nicaea. After the siege, the army had split into 2 forces. There were some trust issues that happened in the army. The Turks took advantage of this problem. The Turk leader Kilij Arslan decided to return after the defeat of Nicaea and go after Bohemon's force. Arslan had around 7,000 troops, while Bohemond had around 10,000 troops, which these 10,000 troops were mostly foot soldiers. Arslan had less amount of troops, but he had a great plan. Arslan decided to surround the Crusaders and strike them at night, so the Crusaders wouldn't know what hit them. There's a great amount of casualties during this fight. The Crusaders panicked and couldn't get a stable line together to get a good counterattack. When it turned day, the other Crusader army sent reinforcements to help Bohemond. With the other half of the army coming, the Turks fled, which ended the battle. After the Battle of Dorylaeum, the Turk leader Kilij Arslan left the Crusaders alone. It was time for the Crusaders to start heading toward Antioch. In the most part, no other forces challenged the Crusaders, but the journey to this city was very harsh. When Arslan fled from battle, he destroyed almost everything that was left behind, or that he left behind. It was very hot since it was in the middle of summer, and the Crusaders did not really have much food or water, and they had a hard time getting food or water. On their travels, many Crusaders died because of hydration, starvation, or just by the heat. But in some cases, some Christians met up with the Crusaders and donated food, money, water, just to help out these Crusaders on their journey. Most of the times, the Crusaders are very desperate, and so they just looted or pillaged homes to get what they needed until they arrived to the city of Antioch. During the siege of Antioch, there was actually two sieges. The first siege was from October 21st, 1097 to June 2nd of 1098, while the second siege happened right after in June of 1098 and lasted for 3 weeks. Antioch was a very well fortified city that would be very hard to get into. The army had to split into many groups and surround the city to just have a chance of the siege to actually work. There was a port not far from the city, so it was very easy for the Crusaders to get reinforcements and supplies. Since the first siege was very long, the Crusaders had to spend the winter there. When winter came, the Crusaders didn't have much food, so they had to pillage local towns and villages to find food. The Crusaders got into the city by Bohemond secretly getting one of the guards to let them in for exchange of money and a title. By the end of the first siege, Bohemond and the Crusaders had almost completely controlled the city. The second siege was 3 weeks of just trying to gain control of the rest of the city, including the citadel. Many Christians and Muslims had died during this siege. The Crusaders had won the battle, and Bohemond was named the Prince of Antioch. The siege of Jerusalem was from the 7th of June to the 15th of July, 1099. This is the last battle of the First Crusade. This time, the Crusaders couldn't surround the city and take their time like they did for the city of Antioch, because the Crusaders did not have much supplies, soldiers, and time to spare. Instead, the Crusaders decided to take the city by a full assault. The first assault failed, but that did not keep the Crusaders away from trying again. After the troops regathered, they decided to push the south gate while also pushing the north wall. The southern gate was more of a distraction, so the north wall would be way more successful. The Crusaders eventually got into the city, but it cost them many men. Once they got into the city, the Crusaders slaughtered every Muslim and all the Jews that went in their way to capture the city. At this point, they had won the siege in the last battle of the First Crusade. After the city of Jerusalem was taken by the Crusaders, they decided to create a new government for the city. After the battle, there was a council that was held in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The leaders of the crusade argued back and forth on who should be the next leader of Jerusalem. It was finally decided with consensus that Godfrey would become the next ruler, since he had the most experience in a ruling position. The leader, Raymond, really did not like this idea, but he still had to go along with it during this time period. Godfrey was granted the title of Defender of the Holy Church Sepulchre. A ballista, which is also known as an ancient missile launcher. This technology was designed to throw huge spears and heavy stones. They're basically a huge crossbow. The purpose of this weapon was to help out during a siege. For example, these helped the Crusaders get over the walls of Nicaea by protecting the ladders going up the Nicaea walls. It helped deter people from sieging walls of different cities also during this time period. This was a great technology for this period in time and helped tremendously during this First Crusade. The battering ram was also known as a type of siege engine. The meaning of siege engine is just another type of technology in this time period that was designed to break through city walls and castle doors. A battering ram is a heavy beam that was used to breach into different fortifications. These were mostly used on the main city gates during the First Crusade. In this image on the left-hand side, they built a slanted roof above the battering ram because this would help protect the soldiers from getting shot by arrows. This tool was very useful during the First Crusade. The First Crusade had a great effect on religion throughout Europe and the Middle East. All religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, had tons of contact with each other due to the traveling and the pilgrimages of all the people in this era. With all the religions bumping up against each other, they sometimes help change the ideas about the religion. The Christian faith was one of the major religions during the Crusade, and it was spread across Europe and the Middle East a lot more during these times. Another significant change that happened because of the First Crusade is that the church grew in power. The church finally came back from the Great Schism by using the Crusades to help gain power and help people gain more faith in the church. Thank you for watching my presentation on the First Crusade. I very much appreciate it. This is my first works cited slide where I got all my information from. And this slide is where all of my images are cited at.